All right, good afternoon, Facebook family. It is a lovely Sunday. I was watching the New Orleans Falcons game, and it's hard to say how it ended. That's what I'll say. But I wanted to remain consistent in checking in around the same time on either Saturdays or Sundays, just to kind of share the word, the aha moments, the things that have stood out as I read throughout Old Testament fun. So for folks who've been vibing, y'all kind of know how the flow goes. As always, I'm encouraging you all to send questions, share comments. Those are things that I look back at and or do my best to acknowledge in real time as I'm reading through some of the scriptures and or sharing my aha moments or the things that I thought about, the things that stood out as I continue to read through. And now we are in chapter 11 and time permitting through 16 of the book of Exodus. So I truly pray everyone is doing well, feeling well. Our family is on the other end of saying farewell, see you later to my father in law, continuing to share good memories, stories, pictures, all the things that bring more smiles and tears. It was a beautiful homegoing service for those who are aware that my father in law passed away the end of October. And I just thank God for the impact. Seeing the impact was everything to me, beyond family, friends, softball community. Um, he was definitely that dude when it came to playing softball as well as serving as an umpire with softball. So I'm excited to continue to share the new stories that we learned and gather, and the continued stories we'll continue to learn as we honor his life and stay connected with softball community, friends, and of course family, no doubt. But it's a beautiful day that the Lord has made to be alive and well. Was very happy to get back home and just looking forward to seeing what the future brings. But without further ado, let's jump right in. So, we are in the book of Exodus, and aha moments for me. I'm gonna pull my notes so I stay focused. But the first aha moment that stood out to me in chapter 11, this is what I wrote according to the reading of verse 3. But I share it in spite of the culture of us versus them. So, y'all know right now, Egypt, oppression, bondage from the Hebrews people. Moses or Moshe has been called to go back and to do what God says, speaking through his right hand man, which is his brother Aaron. Because for those who know, Moses was insecure about his ability to clearly articulate everything that God commanded him because he had like a speech impediment or a stuttering issue. That's something he brought to God when God showed himself through the burning bush and told Moses what he needed him to do. But God already had the plan, right? So he was like, hey, everything I tell you to speak, you're going to make sure that your brother communicate, and y'all going to work together to communicate that at the end of the day, tell Pharaoh as many times as it takes to let my people go. But we know his heart is going to be hardened because that's how God planned it out. But in chapter 11, verse 3, this was one of those hard chapters for me personally. Um, but it's essentially the death of the firstborn sons of the Egyptians, all of their people, and even their livestock, everything that's firstborn. Um, the angel of death comes through and knocks them on out. But verse 3 stood out, and this is what it reads: And the Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. Moreover, the man Moses was very great in the land of Egypt, in the sight of Pharaoh's servants, and in the sight of the people. So the Egyptians are seeing everything that God is allowing to happen by his power through the speaking and the commandment of Moses and Aaron. And they fear God, they respect God, and there's favor now in the sight of the oppressed people, the Hebrews, by the Egyptians, right? So y'all are going to see where the favor sets in. But that was my aha moment there. And then verse 7, I just said, whoa, like that was my initial response when I saw verse 7. But verse 7 of chapter 11 reads, but against none of the children of Israel shall a dog move its tongue against man or beast, that you may know that the Lord does make a difference between the Egyptians and Israel. I said, well, because in context, this is when God tells Moses, I'm about to strike dead every firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh, who sits on the high throne, all the way down to the firstborn of the animals, as well as the Egyptians who were serving, as far as how caste systems are set up, even Egyptians were serving Egyptians based on, in our day and terms, socioeconomic status or caste, where your order of importance, right? So God says this, and then he essentially says, they're going to struggle. The pain is going to be great. The cries of the pain, nothing will be heard like that again. However, none of y'all, children of Israel, will suffer. None of you all will be impacted. Now, what I'm learning and what I'm respecting and understanding about the Most High God is there's always a if and then, and we're going to see what needs to be done, right? So that God's people do not suffer the same plight, right? There is a if and then a lot in the Old Testament. That's what I'll say there. But verse 7 just made me say, whoa, because how it read, which is real strong. The fact that he called them dogs, I just was like, whoa. But anywho, moving to chapter 12, because those were the two things that stood out for me with chapter 11 in the book of Exodus. 8 through 14 is something that really resonated. And then like skipping over 15 to 16, like I did some jumping and skipping, some double dutching. But my takeaway was in chapter 12, select verses, the very first Passover. And then God is specific and very clear. So in Exodus 12, starting with 8 through 14, I'm going to read. And this is essentially, for those who understand culture custom, the Passover. The Passover, the first one is real because this is when we learned that the angel of the Lord, who came and struck dead all of the firstborn, there was something that needed to be done so that God, his angel, would pass over the people of Israel and they would not suffer the same plight of their firstborn all the way down to the property they own, suffering death. But verse 8, then they shall eat the flesh on that night, roasted in fire, with unleavened bread, and with bitter herbs they shall eat it. Verse 9, do not eat it raw, nor boiled at all with water, but roast it in fire, its head with its legs and its entrails. Verse 10, you shall let none of it remain until morning, and what remains of it until morning you shall burn with fire. Verse 11, and thus you shall eat it, with a belt on your waist, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. So you shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. Verse 12, for I will pass through the land of Egypt on that night, and will strike all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast. And against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. I am the Lord. Verse 13, now the blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you are. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you. And the plague shall not be on you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. Verse 14, so this day shall be to you a memorial, and you shall keep it as a feast to the Lord throughout your generations. You shall keep it as a feast by an everlasting ordinance. So fast forward, God specifically tells them to slaughter lambs without blemish. And if the neighbor don't have what they need, you share with your neighbor, right? So that you can be obedient. But they were to slaughter, and then take it from the sheep or the goats. If you ain't got a lamb, get you a goat without blemish. And then he specifies how it needs to be eaten, what you need to be wearing while you eat it, because This is like that breaking point, right? Where the people will finally be let go. So they suited up, booted up, ready to get up out of there because, of course, Pharaoh's going to be in pain and hurting. But for those who know the story, he's not going to let it go. You know what I mean? His land, everything he knows, notoriety, power is destroyed. God has continued to show up and tear it up because Pharaoh's heart remained hardened and he refused to let his people go. All right. So that is the first Passover. And the beauty of that makes more sense as you continue to read God's word and understand significance of what it is and why for generations his people kept and honored the Passover. So that was 8 through 14. Another two verses that stood out was verses 16, where it read, "On the first day there shall be a holy convocation, and on the seventh day there shall be a holy convocation for you. No manner of work shall be done on them, but that which everyone must eat, that only may be prepared by you." All right, so this is kind of like the foreshadow of the official 10 commandments that eventually are going to grow into 600 plus laws, right, that should be kept by God's people. And then verse 19, where it reads, "For 7 days no leaven shall be found in your houses, since whoever eats what is leavened, that same person shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether he is a stranger or a native of the land." I pay attention to stuff like that. All right, so being a part, being grafted in, whether you're a stranger or a native, these are things that you are not to do based on God's will and his command. And it all has significance, right? In the beginning, on the seventh day, God did what? He rested, right? So he's essentially telling people how to continue to honor him and remember the Passover, and all the way down to how you eat and what you don't eat. So we know no leaven in your bread on day 7. Um, and the last two verses was, well, a couple was 24 through 27. And this is God continuing to talk to Moses and help him to understand it's about to get real, and this is what I need y'all to be prepared to do. And verse 24 reads, "And you shall observe this thing as an ordinance for you and your sons forever." 25, "It will come to pass when you come to the land which the Lord will give you, just as he promised, that you shall keep this service." So the service of the Passover, the expectations, right? Verse 26, "And it shall be when your children say to you, 'What do you mean by this service?' Verse 27, that you shall say, 'It is the Passover sacrifice of the Lord, who passed over the houses of the children of Israel in Egypt when he struck the Egyptians and delivered our households.' So the people bowed their heads and worshiped." All right, so we understand the purpose of this is to remember and to not forget, right? Old Testament time, this is Moses writing those first 5 books that is referred to as the Torah for individuals who know that. And so that nobody forgets, this is the custom that they maintain. And when their children, generations down the line are asking, why are we doing this? They are retelling the story of how their people were delivered from the land of Egypt by the power of God, based on the obedience of Moses and Aaron, continuing to express what needed to be shared so that the people of Israel would be let go and return to the land that God had promised since the beginning, right? So beginning meaning since Abram, who turned to Abraham, who had Isaac, who had Jacob, who had Joseph, and all the other 11, and so forth, right? So that's what we know, and that's why we know with chapter 12 all the way through 27. Now, when I talked about the angel of the Lord, which some people call the angel of death, who came through to strike the first male, this is the 10th plague, y'all. There have been 9 plagues to this day, right? The lice, the frogs, the water turned into blood, boils, all of it, locusts. So this is the 10th and final, and that's the death of the firstborn sons. And then I highlighted before we transition to 13, verse 29. And I wrote with verses 40 and 41, which I'll get to in a minute. 430 years, y'all. That was how long they were oppressed in the land of Egypt after Joseph died. And then people forgot his story, who he was, and why the Hebrews were in the land of Egypt in the first place, which was as a result of that famine, severe famine that came up to 7 years, right? Joseph was essentially the second most powerful person in the land of Egypt and took care of Egyptians and his people. And for whatever reason, nobody remembered by the time this Pharaoh, who God hardened heart, by the time it came to their era in time, like nobody remembered or knew the story. And people were getting nervous with how the Hebrews were thriving and procreating, and the people in power. So Pharaoh was like, hey, I don't like it. I think they're going to take over. It's too many of them. Let's go ahead and enslave them, right? To just maintain peace of mind and power. Matter of fact, if y'all see how the story of Moses even began, that Pharaoh was like, man, you got to kill every firstborn, right? So their way of keeping the Israelites, the Hebrew people, subject or oppressed so that they would fear and not have the mindset, because in their minds, too many of y'all gonna take over. All right, so that's the history, that's the backdrop. But let me see, I'm gonna go back to verse 29 of chapter 12. So this is them talking about what happens, but this is the 10th plague hitting. And it came to pass at midnight that the Lord struck all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on his throne to the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of livestock. So this is what God said would happen happening. And then we jump to the 40 and 41 verses where we see how long they were oppressed up until finally being let go. And verse 40 of chapter 12 reads, now the sojourn of the children of Israel who lived in Egypt was 430 years. Long time. Verse 41. And it came to pass at the end of the 430 years, on that very same day, it came to pass that all the armies of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. So that's all of God's people. So 430 years, the day that they first went in 430 years ago, is when they were finally released from Egypt to go into the land which God had promised. So something I wrote at the very end, referencing verses 40 through 49, this was my takeaway. Now I better understand why the Pharisees and other law keepers, so Sadducees and all those folks, they were up in arms about Paul's teachings in the New Testament of salvation by grace and grace alone through faith, and circumcision now being of the heart and not physically and literally. Now I better understood it because of reading the history, right, the Old Testament, and it was 43 through 49, which allowed me to have that aha moment. And it reads, and the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, this is the ordinance of the Passover. No foreigner shall eat it, but every man's servant who is bought for money, when you have circumcised him, then he may eat it. A sojourner and a hired servant shall not eat it. In one house it shall be eaten. You shall not carry any of the flesh outside the house, nor shall you break one of his bones. All the congregation of Israel shall keep it. And when a stranger dwells with you and wants to keep the Passover to the Lord, because this is what he's talking about, let all his males be circumcised, and then let him come near and keep it, and he shall be as a native of the land, for no uncircumcised person shall eat it. And then verse 49, one law shall be for the native born and for the stranger who dwells among you. All right. So what we notice about God is until you are grafted in the way he expects you to, so that he can call you his own, if you are not a native, meaning Israelite, Hebrew, is through circumcision. All right. Now you can go and serve and work with them and alongside them, but until you are circumcised and underneath that covenant, until you become one of them, meaning following the way, God's way, he doesn't even allow you to partake and or be a part of the culture, the customs of what it means to be underneath or grafted in. So we see a lot of that cool reality even in the Old Testament. It's not like a aha, oh, this is real new in the New Testament, where we'll see a lot of the older heads in the game saying, I don't like it, right? How are these uncircumcised Gentiles now being counted unto righteousness, right? They ain't following the laws. They didn't grow up our way, right? But even in the beginning, God made it clear and specific of how, right? How the individuals would be a part and able to be a part without the difference of So that's what stood out and why I was like, I see why Pharisees, law keepers, feel some type of way about now learning through Paul's teachings about circumcision now being of the heart and not the literal way to be quote unquote grafted in and one with God, or God's people. So that was it for chapter 12 for me. Chapter 13, 21, and 22 jumped out next. And I wrote how God showed them the way. He was always with them. So we're going to see the excitement of they've been released to be free out of the land of Egypt. They are following the expectation of be girded up, have your shoes on, have your belt on, have everything ready to go. Eat in haste, right? Don't break no bones. Just eat what I tell you based on the unblemished goats and or sheep. All of y'all, and then get up out of there. Like leave. And then if you read everything, you'll also see where due to the favor they had with the Egyptians, they were given a lot of things that was a sign or a signet of wealth. So gold and all the food and all the jewelry, like all the fancy things they left. They didn't leave poor and without. They left with more than enough to establish their nation in the land in which God promised. But jumping to verses 21 and 22 of chapter 13, it reads, let me turn. But it reads, and the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so as to go by day and night. Verse 22, he did not take away the pillar of cloud by day or the pillar of fire by night from before the people. So they could see the Lord God with them in the daytime, the pillar of a cloud, nighttime, pillar of fire. And they could hear Moses, who received what he needed from God, until God himself decided to make his voice audible and clearly heard to all the people, which we'll see later on, because we're going to see how the people are, right? But the context makes sense for how the people are. But I'll stop there. But that is what stood out to me. God was with them and showed himself pillar of cloud, pillar of fire the whole way. Now, jumping to chapter 14, 13 through 21, I just wrote the power of God, the Red Sea crossing. I grew up watching a lot of movies and like reenactments of these things. So it's always so cool to read it and see what it really was for yourself, because we know when people do movies or when they reshare stories, sometimes they embellish, they get a little extra, and then sometimes they leave out things that are very key, right? But 14 verses 13 through 31, I'm gonna read it because y'all know. But for those who already know how I roll, have your Bible, follow along. But chapter 14 verses 13, it reads, and Moses said to the people, do not be afraid. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall see again no more forever. 14. The Lord will fight for you, and you shall hold your peace. You ain't got to do nothing. Verse 15. And the Lord said to Moses, why do you cry to me? Tell the children of Israel to go forward. Verse 16, but lift up your rod and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it. And the children of Israel shall go on dry ground through the midst of the sea. 17, and I indeed will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, and they shall follow them. So I will gain honor over Pharaoh and over all his armies, his chariots, and his horsemen. 18, then the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord, when I have gained honor for myself over Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen. 19. And the angel of God, who went before the camp of Israel, moved and went behind them. And the pillar of cloud went from before them and stood behind them. So now we know, for folks who need the context, the people of Israel, Hebrews are tripping. They are nervous as all get out. They see and hear Pharaoh's the army, the horsemen coming on the chariots, right? They can see it, they can hear it, ground trembling, right? And then they see water in front of a whole sea. So nobody's comfortable, right? And they start to complain, man, you don't send us out here to die now. Never mind the 10 plagues and how God is straight up showed up and showed out, right? They are nervous. So God is talking to Moses like, man, what you crying out to me for? We good. Do what I say. It's going to be well. Tell them to hold their peace and stand still. They don't need to be frantic. They don't need to go run it back and saying, I'm sorry, he made me leave, right? So that's where we are with that, far as folks like trying to understand what I'm saying up to this point, right? And that is, again, chapter 14. And I stopped on 19. Now I'm going to continue on. So 20. So it came between the camp of the Egyptians, it meaning the angel of God, who's that pillar of cloud, between God's people and Pharaoh's folks on the way, standing between, right? So it came between the camp of the Egyptians and the camp of Israel. Thus it was a cloud and darkness to the one, and it gave light by night to the other, so that the one did not come near the other at all that night. So Pharaoh and his people see darkness. They can't see which way to go, how to get, right? But there is light. I don't know if y'all have seen like those double mirrors, if you need like an example. So the double mirror where you can see out at the people, but when they look in the mirror from the other side, they can't see you. That is how God allowed his angel to show up and be for Pharaoh. Darkness, can't see him if you wanted to. And then the Israelites, they can see clear as day, and them being confused trying to figure out like, man, which way they went. I can't see them. I thought that was dope, but that's me, right? So that's what that means at verse 20. 21. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and made the sea into dry land, and the waters were divided. 22. So the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea on the dry ground, and the waters were a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. Good afternoon, Cousin Rob. And the Egyptians pursued and went after them into the midst of the sea, all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. 24. Now it came to pass in the morning watch that the Lord looked down upon the army of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and cloud, and he troubled the army of the Egyptians. So y'all check this. It's nightfall before the sea was parted. The people are nervous and scared. God allows his angel to protect them all night until it was time for Moses to part the sea. Now we're getting into the daytime. So y'all know sea clearly was a big sea, right? They have started their trek through the sea, the Red Sea that was divided, walking on dry land, right? Now, here we are in the daytime, and God troubled the army of the Egyptians in 24. 25. And he took off their chariot wheels so that they drove them with difficulty. And the Egyptians said, let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord fights for them against the Egyptians. So this is God being true to his promise when he told his people, stand still, don't worry, we good, right? 26. Then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the sea, that the waters may come back upon the Egyptians on their chariots and on their horsemen. Whew. 27. And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and when the morning appeared, the sea returned to its full depth while the Egyptians were fleeing into it. So the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. Verse 28. Then the waters returned and covered the chariots, the horsemen, and all the army of Pharaoh that came into the sea after them. Not so much as one of them remained. 29. But the children of Israel had walked on dry land in the midst of the sea, and the waters were a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. And last but not least, 30. So the Lord saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Now, again, God continued to show up in his might and power and protect his people. But we'll see how the people gonna people, right? Regardless of everything. So that is what I wanted to read for the crossing. 31 is essentially, thus Israel saw the great work which the Lord had done in Egypt. So the people feared the Lord and believed the Lord and his servant Moses. So they got reassurances. They fear, they respect, they believe as a result of that. And then in chapter 15 too, I just wrote yes. So verse 2 is you know how it is when we celebrate a good victory, we gonna make a song about it, right? So this is essentially like a song, a recap of them celebrating like we free, like we good. We don't made it to the other side, walk through dry land, and watch the power of God up to the 10 plagues to the point of the parting of the sea, and then all of the armies being depleted, like drowned. That's it. So verse 7, not verse 7, but chapter 15, verse 2, I just said yes, exclamation mark, and it reads, the Lord is my strength and song, and he has become my salvation. He is my God, and I will praise him. My father's God, and I will exalt him. It's all a song, y'all, but all of chapter 15 reads them retelling the story, and honoring and worshiping God through song. But I just said yes there. And then verse 7, same reaction, just excited to kind of read and see. But it reads, and in the greatness of your excellence, you have overthrown those who rose against you. You sent forth your wrath, it consumed them like stubble. So again, they talking about how big their God is with joy through song, right? And then what I was excited about to see in chapter 15 jumps to verse 20. And I wrote, the first prophetess mentioned was Miriam. And for y'all who remember, Miriam was Moses and Aaron's sister. So way back in the start of the story of Moses, we learned that Miriam was kind of hiding in the shrubs after she strategically placed Moses when he was a little baby in the basket right where he knew Pharaoh's daughter would come out to, bathe and do what she does. And the baby cried at the right time, and that's how Moses essentially became an Egyptian. But she knew who he was when she saw him. She knew it was a Hebrew baby. And then Miriam was there like since the beginning until Moses had to flee due to defending his people because he knew who he was when he saw them being abused and beaten ridiculously. But Miriam, in reason verse 20, then Miriam, the prophetess, the sister of Aaron, took the timbrel in her hand, tambourine, y'all, tambourine, and all the women went out after her with timbrels and with dances. So, still celebrating, still worshiping God. I smile when I see words prophetess because I also understand from a cultural standpoint, even in these wonderful Americas, there are different feels about women's roles, especially when it comes to being a mouthpiece. However, I thank God for the Holy Spirit. I thank God for His Word. I thank God for the order in which things should be done. But that's the first time that I saw the word prophetess, and it's not the last time. Which, for those who read through the Word of God, like you'll see Anna, Lydia, Deborah, Deborah, like it's many more that are acknowledged. Some married, some not married. But that's God's way. That's God's will. But that's what stood out to me. And then 22 through 27 is when, again, the people gone people, right? So they're on the other side of the Red Sea. They're on their way to the promised land, which God said is theirs to have, to return to. Because before they came into Egypt, they were already there. Jacob's people, Joseph's brothers and them, they were in the land promised to them, the land of Canaan. But chapter 15, verse 22 reads, so Moses brought Israel from the Red Sea. Then they went out into the wilderness of Shur, and they went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. Verse 23, now when they came to Marah, they could not drink the waters of Marah, for they were bitter. Therefore, the name of it was called Marah. 24, and the people complained against Moses, saying, what shall we drink? 25, so he cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree. When he cast it into the waters were made sweet. There he made a statute and an ordinance for them, and there he tested them. So this is God. Verse 26, and said, this is God's, if you diligently heed the voice of the Lord your God and do what is right in his sight, give ear to his commandments and keep all his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you which I have brought on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you. Verse 27, then they came to Elam, where there were 12 wells of water, and 70 palm trees, so they camped there by the waters. Right? So people were complaining about what are we gonna drink? It's been 3 days. Y'all know logically, biologically, you can only go so many days before it's gonna be a problem because the body needs water. But I wrote here when I read 20 verses 22 through 27, they stay complaining, and I laughed about it because for those who know the story, there was always complaining. It started with the plagues, right? Pharaoh was upset about things in the beginning, and he made their labor harder. And the people were like, Moses, like, bruh, like, let it go. We've been here long enough. You making it hard on us, just let it go. But Moses was like, nope, this is what God says. I got to do my thing. Um, but God is faithful. All of chapter 16, y'all, is good. I can't stress that enough. This is kind of manna from heaven or bread from heaven, however your word reads. I'm rocking with the New King James, and then that 1613 edition of King James, the version of the word. But if you are like, oh, it's a lot of reading, it's so much, read it anyways. That's just my takeaway. But what I would say is if you read, when you read, you will see how God continues to provide for his people. Despite them complaining and being nervous and being frustrated, God continues to take care of his people. And I'm going to read it, and because that's where I'm going to stop. I said we was going to get through 11 through 16. But 2 through 35, right? The first part of it is the story of, and I'll read it. I'm going to just read it all. So verse 1, chapter 16. They journeyed from Elam, and all the congregation of the children of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin. Symbolism, significance, pay attention, which is between Elam and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after they departed from the land of Egypt. So they're in day 15 in the second month, trying to get to the promised land. And we know, y'all, if you paid attention to how long it took Jacob and his household of 70 plus to get to Egypt, it wasn't that long. So the wilderness of sin is where the significance comes, and we'll see why. But verse 2, then the whole congregation of the children of Israel complained against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. They're going to keep complaining. Verse 3, and the children of Israel said to them, oh, that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the pots of meat, and when we ate bread to the full. For you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. So they was complaining about being thirsty, now they complain about being hungry. Again, day 15, second month. Verse 4, then the Lord said to Moses, behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a certain quota every day, that I may test them whether they will walk in my law or not. This is God talking to Moses, y'all. Verse 5. And it shall be on the 6th day that they shall prepare what they bring in, and it shall be twice as much as they gather daily. Verse 6. Then Moses and Aaron said to all the children of Israel, at evening you shall know that the Lord has brought you out of the land of Egypt. Verse 7. And in the morning you shall see the glory of the Lord, for he hears your complaints against the Lord. But what are we that you complain against us? So that's Moses talking to the people. Like, God hear you, he got you. But what are we? We as in Moses and Aaron. Like, what are we? Why are you complaining against us? Verse 8. Also Moses said, this shall be seen when the Lord gives you meat to eat in the evening, and in the morning bread to the full. For the Lord hears your complaints which you make against him. And what are we? Your complaints are not against us, but against the Lord. Verse 9. Then Moses spoke to Aaron, say to all the congregation of the children of Israel, come near before the Lord, for he has heard your complaints. Verse 10. Now it came to pass, as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation of the children of Israel, that they looked toward the wilderness, and behold, the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, verse 12, I have heard the complaints of the children of Israel. Speak to them, saying, at twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall be filled with bread, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God. Verse 13, so it was that quail came up at evening and covered the camp, and in the morning the dew lay all around the camp. 14, and when the layer of dew lifted, there on the surface of the wilderness was a small round substance as fine as frost on the ground. 15. So when the children of Israel saw it, they said to one another, what is it? for they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, This is the bread which the Lord has given you to eat. Verse 16, this is the thing which the Lord has commanded. Let every man gather it according to each one's needs, 1 omer for each person. According to the number of persons, let every man take for those who are in his tent. The test is going to come. The Lord said he's going to test them, right? Verse 18, so when they measured it by omers, he who gathered much had nothing left over, and he who gathered little had no lack. I don't know about y'all, but when I read stuff like this, I pay attention. When you out here being greedy, you ain't got nothing. When you out here following instructions according to what God has said, you're lacking nothing. All right, so to me, it's a lot of beauty in understanding how God works, right? What God expects of his people. The beauty of being content, right? Not getting caught up and feeling like you need to go out and get all because you have nothing, right? But he said, you do what you need to do, you're going to lack nothing. Every man had gathered according to each one's need. Verse 19. And Moses said, let no one leave any of it till morning. 20. Notwithstanding, they did not heed Moses. Here go the people. They been tested and they failing, y'all. So you just saw in 20, they did not heed Moses. But some of them left part of it until morning, and it bred worms and stank. And Moses was angry with them. Verse 21. So they gathered it every morning, every man according to his need. And when the sun became hot, it melted. 22. And so it was on the 6th day that they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers for each one. And all the rulers of the congregation came and told Moses. 23. Then he said to them, this is what the Lord has said. Tomorrow is a Sabbath rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you will bake today, and boil what you will boil, and lay up for yourselves all that remains to be kept until morning. Verse 24. So they laid it up till morning as Moses commanded, and it did not stink, nor were there any worms in it. So this is the 6th day going into the Sabbath, the 7th day of the week, where God said that's when you take double. You don't do 1, you do 2. So they're being obedient. Verse 25. Then Moses said, eat that today, for today is a Sabbath to the Lord. Today you will not find it in the field. 26. 6 days you shall gather it, but on the 7th day, the Sabbath, there will be none. 27. Now it happened that some of the people went out on the 7th day to gather, but they found none. 28. And the Lord said to Moses, how long do you refuse to keep my commandments and my laws? Verse 29. See, for the Lord has given you the Sabbath, therefore he gives you on the 6th day bread for 2 days. Let every man remain in his place. Let no man go out of his place on the 7th day. Verse 30. So the people rested on the 7th day. 31. And the house of Israel called its name manna, and it was like white coriander seed, and the taste of it was like wafers made with honey. I want some of that. That sounds good. Verse 32. Then Moses said, this is the thing which the Lord has commanded. Fill an omer with it to be kept for your generations, that they may see the bread which I fed you in the wilderness when I brought you out of the land of Egypt. 33. And Moses said to Aaron, take a pot and put an omer of manna in it and lay it up before the Lord to be kept for your generations. 34. As the Lord commanded Moses, so Aaron laid it up before the testimony to be kept. Verse 35. And the children of Israel ate manna 40 years until they came to an inhabited land. They ate manna until they came to the border of the land of Canaan. Now, the land of Canaan is the promised land, y'all. They ate it for 40 years. 36. Now, an omer is 1/5 of an ephah. So, I don't know Hebrew, Israel math, but it's very clear and specific. But that was chapters 11 through 16 of the book of Exodus. Y'all have seen and the story of 430 years in Egypt, fast forward to 40 years in the wilderness. But God continued to show presence and be present. And we also see that the people of God continue to be hard-headed. But God still continued to be with them and to take care of them and to supply their needs. But y'all know it doesn't take 40 years. It never took 40 years to get to the land, the promised land of Canaan. But that is all that I have for y'all. I pray y'all continue to make it a great Veterans Day weekend. For folks who have served, know that you are appreciated. I pray that your heart is on full. I pray that God is residing on the inside of you and that you have joy unspeakable despite any and all experiences that you may have lived through serving and protecting the country. But yeah, big up to our veterans. I pray that y'all feel like the some very special people on the day where we honor coming up on Monday. It's been real, Lord willing. Next weekend I'll be able to check in around the same time frame. For folks who've been rocking with me, it's either been like Saturdays, which it won't be because next weekend baby girl in travel softball mode. But if all works out, it'll be Sunday, 4 p.m. Eastern time. And again, as y'all have questions, comments, like shoot them. I just do the recap, do the studies. Folks want to jump on and chop it up. Y'all know y'all are also welcome. We can have a watch party, back and forth conversation in the live. But I plan to, and this is always the plan, many of the plans of man, but I plan to continue with, I think it's chapter 12 and through either 18, or depending on how ambitious and how I can do and honor like a 45-minute time frame. We might go 12 through 20. We're going to see. But that's for folks who want to jump in, join in, chat with me, and or just be prepared with whatever was on your mind or aha moments. But I love y'all. Continue to keep us lifted in thoughts and prayers. Know we'll do the same for y'all. And until next time, continue to make it a great